Kandagawa Jet Girls, or Kandagawa Jet Girls, is the latest effort by famed game director Kenichiro Takaki, best known for his work on the Senran Kagura, Valkyrie Drive, and Uppers series of games. Developed by Honeyparade Games and released by Exceed and Marvelous on January 16th of 2020 in Japan, it's seen its North American release on August 25th of the same year. As a Kenichiro Takaki game, for better or worse, it bears many of the hallmarks we've come to expect from him and his teams. But in light of the new policies at Sony, as well as increased pressure across all of Japan, certain aspects have been toned down in an attempt to clean up Japan's image before the wave of tourists arrive for the upcoming Olympic Games. So what does it mean to have a toned down Kenichiro Takaki game? And how do the hallmarks of his other titles, the pros and the cons, translate into this new experience in a different genre? Well, like usual, let's start by taking a look at the story. So yeah, the story. There isn't really much of one. Kandagawa Jet Girls, rather than focusing on telling one grand story with some exciting overarching plot, instead uses the backdrop of an upcoming jet ski racing competition called the Kandagawa Cup to create vignettes into the lives of the competition's racers, their struggles, and how they'll ultimately overcome them in some pretty lighthearted slice-of-life styled sequences. There are a total of 8 vignettes. Of these 8, 7 explore duos of Double D dames, giving each of the 14 characters ample screen time. The 8th vignette serves as a cap to the overarching plot and a finale to the 7th character story that remains locked until the first 6 are completed. These stories range in quality and believability, and when attempting to play a more serious note, it can often be hard to get behind the characters and their struggles. But it's not bad if all you're looking for is to break out of a slump of overly serious and dreary games and spend time in the sun with some cute leading ladies instead. Personally, and this isn't usually the case for me, one of my favorite duos ended up being the gals. They're one of the more exaggerated duos, and the simplicity of their problems, i.e. looking for a cure to their boredom, was just lazy enough that I enjoyed it. And while the overarching plot does kind of go somewhere in the 7th and 8th scenarios, it'd be hard to say that it's very climactic at all. In a way, the problems faced here are twofold, where life or death as well as some levels of existential crisis are on the line, but the threat is played as such a background issue that it doesn't exactly feel like you're overcoming some great feat. And at the end of this, the game just ends. It's not the strongest effort from the team, but an interesting venture from them nonetheless. And I do prefer when my racing games have something of a story to go with them, or at least a system that gives you differing goals or challenges to accomplish each race. Shout out to the best Mario Kart game out there. But story is, of course, only part of the experience, and as a genre title, I'm quite aware that most people do not buy racing games for the plot or the plot. So let's shift gears and, what pun do I go here with? A sink or swim pun? A make a splash pun? Either way, they'll both actually hurt to write, put in the script, and say out loud, so you guys can just fill it in yourself. So, here's the gameplay. Yeah, it's professional. Kandagawa Jet Girls is Mario Kart, but broken. So let's take a look at the technical aspects now. Alright, so maybe that deserves some explanation. Let's start by going over each of the racing mechanics, cause this game does a very commendable job in this department. As I already alluded to, functionally, Kandagawa Jet Girls is basically a kart racer. Most of the genre staples are present and accounted for, but we do have some unique aspects. For starters, the game takes some inspiration from the underrepresented style of Mario Kart's Double Dash, where we have a jetter and a gunner. The jetter, of course, controls the jet ski, while the gunner fires on your opponents and the various obstacles that may litter your path. Every gunner starts the race with the same default weapon, but you can pick up different weapons from item boxes as you go. These can be fired ahead of you or behind. While firing behind you, you have more direct control over your aiming, but the auto aim will likely be doing most of the work for you, just as the auto steering at this time will be preventing you from crashing. Outside of this, the gunner doesn't play a huge role in the racing. For the jetter, the set of affairs is mostly pretty standard. Holding gas at the 2 count can start you off with a boost. boost. Drifting is present and can be charged to different levels tied to these 3 meters down here. The further you drift, the more they charge, and the higher level the charge, the longer the boost upon exiting the drift. Drifting, as well as ramps, rings, boost pads, etc. will also charge your EPD meter down here. This EPD meter is just another way to boost, but requires at least 20% charge. At 100%, you can use a special ability, but what ability that is will be based on 2 things. Each duo of girls has their own unique ability, but if you have a non-default weapon in your possession, the 100% EPD special will be based on that. The water physics are of course something you need to adjust for and consider when steering, but it's not hard to get used to nor very crippling for newcomers to wave racers. We also have some unique nose controls here. Pulling back on the analog stick will raise your jet ski's nose out of the water, boosting your max speed by a small margin but at a cost to your handling capabilities. Pushing forward on the analog will push the nose into the water and cause the opposite effect. When going off a ramp, you can perform a small handful of tricks using both analog sticks, and these tricks come with special benefits as well, often making you temporarily invulnerable to enemy attacks, raising your EPD slightly, or boosting your speed for a short amount of time. Of course, to win the race, you'll want to come in first place, but there are a small set of goals you can try to accomplish while racing, such as not hitting any walls, blasting all your opponents with a single shot, or using 4 different weapon types in one race, among other things. Completing all of these tasks will unlock new cosmetics for you to buy in the in-game store. So there's definitely a handful of stuff designed to keep you busy and entertained, and I find the focus on making this a rather mechanically fleshed out game quite commendable. But we'll revisit this in a bit, and I'll tell you then why it doesn't add up to very much. But before we do that, let's talk about the jet skis. Each duo of girls has their own unique jet ski with their own unique stats for acceleration, speed, and handling. These jet skis can be outfitted to your preference with color controls, gradients, decals, special effects, and of course machine parts made to raise your stats and battle efficiency. The machine parts unlock gradually over the course of the game and can be bought from the in-game shop. Thankfully, it doesn't matter which duo of girls you're playing as or what jet ski you're using. If you bought an item at the shop once, it can be used by anybody at any time. These machine parts are rather pricey though, and your racing prize money often won't foot the bill. Now you can choose to be choosy and choose only the choicest choice parts the shop has to offer, or you can head to the mini games found in the dressing room to raise some extra cash and buy them all. These mini games are very simple, even on the hardest difficulties, but they net you loads of cash. Though they're not tied to the story in any way and can be ignored entirely, in my mind I worked these mini games into the narrative and started viewing them like the girls hustling for cash in between races to up their chances at victory. And in that light, it kind of became a fun part of a pseudo-narrative cycle while playing. The only game I found here that maybe had any semblance of difficulty was this treadmill one, where you have to button mash to get ahead, but it only becomes hard as a test of endurance. At one point, for me, it triggered some MGS1 flashbacks and a feeling of my arm wanting to separate from the rest of my body, which clearly takes its usefulness for granted. But I will say it functions much better than the Dreadmill in Ring Fit Adventure, so I'm not complaining. Now, being able to raise the money to buy every single machine part without grinding races is pretty nice, but buying the parts doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to use them all at once. In a rather needed yet ultimately futile attempt to prevent you from becoming overpowered, the amount of new machine parts you can equip is limited by the amount of equip points your jet ski currently has. Machine parts have varied point costs. The more you win races, the more you raise your jet ski's total point limit, thus allowing you to add or stack new upgrades to your machine. Now, I addressed this as a futile attempt to prevent you from becoming overpowered. So now it's time to circle back to 2 things I left somewhat unaddressed earlier. 1. For better or worse, this game bears many of the hallmarks of Kenichiro Takaki's other games. And 2. Despite the commendable effort put into making this a mechanically fleshed out game, it doesn't add up to much. The common thread here is that Kenichiro games are often completely imbalanced, and unlike a Senran Kagura or a Valkyrie Drive title, where you can have fun with that lack of balance, here it completely destroys the experience and undermines the mechanics, at the worst of times making them completely useless. The AI and rubber banding in this game is so bad that I strictly limited myself in some races to doing nothing but pressing the gas and turning. No ramps, no boosts, no drifts, no weapons, no tricks, no specials, nothing. And I still ended up finishing 30 or more seconds ahead of the next closest opponent. When actually using the game's mechanics, you run the risk of finishing a minute or more ahead of your opponents, and at the worst of times, lapping them. For the record, this isn't a genre that I'm particularly good at, and this was my experience before even starting to upgrade my jet skis. It wasn't until the 7th campaign that I ran into any race that gave me any challenge, but then I just added a couple machine parts to boost my acceleration and the race was as good as won. Boosting acceleration is all you ever really need. Max speed, even with a fully upgraded jet ski, is still pretty slow compared to other racers, so if you can start a race by getting ahead, you've already won. This tends to make the weapons and special techniques useless. What good are special weapons if there's no opponents around to fire them at? It's because of this imbalance that I ended up not getting the platinum for this game. The only trophy I'm missing is the one for using special techniques 50 times, and I'm not about to grind out 50 of them for the sake of an achievement that I don't care about and I won't enjoy getting. It would maybe take an hour to do, but I just can't be bothered. What Kandagawa Jet Girls ultimately boils down to is spending time with shallow but lighthearted fun characters in short visual novel segments bookended with races where you stroll leisurely through 8 empty tracks with 3 different routes at 2 different times of day, just taking in the sights and sounds, the bright blue sky and the sunlight cascading on the water. The game at least looks good, I can't fault it there. If anything, I'd say this is possibly Takaki's best looking game to date, and it does have some fun references for longtime fans of his games. A couple Senran Kagura characters make appearances outside of the main story, and we even have a nod to one of my favorite Valkyrie Drive characters, Manpukumaru. But since we're on the note of Takaki's returning hallmarks, maybe it's time to address a few that didn't return. One of the biggest people will likely notice is the absence of a dressing room petting game, something that was removed from the PlayStation version of Senran Kagura Burst Renewal to great controversy. I was never the biggest fan of these as I don't find them that entertaining, but in regards to the game's director, it's a noticeable absence. It does largely seem like this game was designed from the ground up with the current general public's ethics in mind, which also means no clothing damage system. It kinda sucks to see this missing, as I always rather enjoyed the fun cutaways, but let's face it, with a complete and utter lack of balance, we would have never been seeing them anyway. Curiously, there's no diorama mode either. Again, this is a mode I never really cared for, but I always use them just to make the thumbnails for these videos, so whatever my thumbnail is now, it's probably just not gonna be nearly as good. Breast physics at least haven't gone away yet, and I'll be completely upfront with this, I find the total absence of breast physics in some games far more distracting than when they're exaggerated. But yeah, there's not much more to go over there. So let's hit on some quick technical aspects and then wave goodbye to this review. Gotta see what I did there? Terrible. Kandagawa Jet Girls is a nice looking game. Its anime aesthetic and summertime feel is realized strongly with some high contrast and saturated colors. The look of the waves and the sun really sells you on the feeling of a hot summer day. Performance, however, isn't quite where it needs to be. In races, the frame pacing can get a bit gummy, but not so much that it causes major issues. One of the most noticeable performance issues comes in the pre-race cutscenes while the announcers talk over B-roll of the track. Here, the frame rate is all over the place and screen tearing runs rampant. On menus, if a menu selection has a 3D model to accompany it, the load time just to scroll to or past it feels incredibly janky. The voices in the game are Japanese only, but they're about standard quality for Takaki's games, which I'd say is really not too bad at all.
Oi, mister! そんな奴らに謝んなくていいんだよ。ごめんね、お前たちの輝ける場所を奪ってやる。そうだね、神。
The translation isn't bad, but there is one text-based annoyance. In the options, you can choose to display your speed in kilometers or miles per hour. However, race goals only display in kilometers. It's a small annoyance having a game tell you to reach 100 kilometers an hour during a race when your on-screen speed is measured in miles, but it is an annoyance nonetheless. The OST is pretty decent, with some songs actually getting stuck in my head for a few hours, but I wouldn't say it's better than many of the mainline Senran Kagura games. Some songs from older Takaki games are reprised here as well. In a previous review, I criticized one of the tracks for being a blatant copy of a baby metal song. Now, in fairness, this baby metal song and the song in the OST use the traditional Japanese piece Sakura Sakura for its main motif. So of course, the songs bear similarities, but thankfully when it was reprised for Jet Girls, it wasn't the same 1-1 copy of Baby Metal's version we heard before. Rather, it comes in with a new rendition altogether, which was very nice to hear. So this wasn't the strongest OST for the company, but it's far from being a poor one. There is a free race mode, of course, which does have difficulty scaling, but even on hard, it's far too easy. The game supports online as well, which is probably your only chance of finding true challenge, but given the niche nature of this title, this won't be active for very long. In total, the game runs about 14 hours to complete the main story and about 15 hours for a platinum trophy. This was a noble effort for the team, and I respect their desire to branch out and try new things, but the shortcomings they carry with them from game to game is nothing short of a death blow in this genre, and this is something they'll need to work out before ever trying this genre again. So the question remains, who can I actually recommend this game to? Well, if nautical nonsense be something you wish, lest you detest loads of luscious ladies made lonely, lazily lapping left behind losers, then drop on the deck and flop like a fish, I guess. It's not easy to recommend this game to anybody. My biggest reason for buying and not complaining about the price, despite thinking from the first trailers that it was looking a bit rough, is that I really want to see Takaki and his studio get back on track, as I find their games at the very least interesting to check out and usually fun. But they've not been on a good track for some time now, and I'm not about to falsify a review hoping you guys snatch this up to help them out either. Which puts this company in a heavy predicament. Without more sales, they may not get the funding they need to make a better game. But without making better, they're not earning the sales. At this point, I really think Takaki maybe needs to reevaluate some of his efforts and hammer out the team's eccentricities to make sure their odd quirks don't get carried over to games that will completely die on them. Even if we just keep getting smaller games like this one at somewhat higher than deserving prices, it would at least make it possible to recommend buying a game on a sale. But as it is right now, a purchase for support and for love of the game's aesthetic is about all I can recommend it on. And frankly, that's just not enough. And that's all I'm going to say on Kandagawa Jet Girls, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys liked the video or found it useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to all my socials and the Patreon support page are in the description below, and as always, folks, thanks for watching.